me up by one. Will pump me up by one. I'll just go ahead and pump me up by one. Pump me up by one. Oh boy, that is. I'm gonna mute my microphone. Oh no. That's fine. Hello, beautiful folks. My name is Geometric Shapes, and today we're going to be doing something that I talked about doing on Twitter, and that is we are going to be reading the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. Is a seminal work in leftist ideology, and we are going to kind of take a look at what it says, and I'll draw some conclusions from that, do that sort of thing, the thing that YouTuber do. Although I'm not currently acting in my role as the Geometric Shapes YouTuber right now. This is just something that I'm doing. If you wish to join me reading side by side, I am reading via the Project Gutenberg ebook, which is free. It is 61 pages long, and this is the version that was released in 1888, edited by Frederick Ingalls. We're going to take a look at this. I'm also drinking tea because I talked a lot today. I don't know if we're going to read through the whole thing tonight. I was planning on recording my Black History Month videos tonight, but I spent a lot of time hanging out with a friend, and that just kind of took it out of me. So I'm just like, well, I need to do something a bit more structured where I don't have to worry about being as animated. And also, I talked a lot. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump right into the manifesto of the Communist Party. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals, and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Where is the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its reactionary adversaries? Two things result from this fact. 1. Communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. 2. It is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in the English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. Okay, so basically it seems to me that Karl Marx was tired of people using communism as a, just a, like an insult to hurl at your other political opponents, and that it was doing a disservice to the actual communists and what they believe. If the only context anyone ever hears is, oh, communist is what you call the guy who disagrees with you, then that, it doesn't really hold any meaning. And it takes the legs out of the movement. So basically by saying Yes, look, this is a situation that everyone is apparently so terrified of that they're willing to use it as an insult to damage the reputation of their political adversaries. We should go ahead and voice what we actually believe and um, basically like take the teeth out. Like those guys aren't communists. They're not communists. We're communists, and this is what we believe. So let's get to section one: bourgeoisie and proletarians. The history of all here. Here to though exists societies is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterpreted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold uh, gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guild masters, journeymens, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. I don't know why I want to say gradations. The modern bourgeoisie society that has sprouted from the ruin of feudal society has not done away with class antagonism. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in a place of the old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, in two great classes directly facing each other: the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed: the discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opening up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and in commodities generally gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulsive, never before known, and here to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, under which industrial production was monopolized by closed guilds, now no longer sufficed for the growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guild masters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Therefore, steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacturing was taken by the giant modern industry, the place of the industrial middle class by industrial millionaires, the leaders of whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeoisie. Modern industry has established the world market, for which the discovery of America paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its time, reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, railways extended in the same proportion to the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie is itself the product of a long course of development, a series of revolutions in the modes of production and of exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class, an oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self governing association in the medieval commune. Here, independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, their taxable third estate of the monarchy, as in France. Afterwards, in the period of manufacture uh, proper, serving either the semi feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and in fact, cornerstone of the great monarchs in general. The bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself, in the modern representative state, exclusive political sway. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie historically have played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self interest, than calloused cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless and indefensible chartered freedoms, it has set up that single, unconscionable, unconscionable. God, I'm so bad at words. Freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religion and political illusions, naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped off its halo every occupation hereto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced family relations to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionists so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. Indolence. Indolence? Really? It has been the first to show what man's activities can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of productions, and with them the whole relations of society. Conversation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeoisie epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast frozen relationships with their train of ancient and vulnerable prejudices and opinion are swept away. All new formed ones become acquainted before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real condition of life and his relation with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its production chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed, or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones, industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every corner of the globe. In the place of old wants satisfied by the productions of the country, we find new wants requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations, and as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one sidedness and narrow mindedness have become more and more impossible. From the numerous national and local literatures, there arise a world of literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap price of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, i.e., to become bourgeoisie themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The bourgeoisie has subjected the country to the rule of towns. It has created enormous cities, has greatly increased the urban population as compared with the rural, and has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idolatry of rural life. Just as it has made the country dependent on the towns, so has it made the barbarian and semi barbarian countries dependent on the civilized ones. Nations of peasants on nations of bourgeoisie, the East on the West. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population, of the means of production, and of property. It has agglomerated production and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent or but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Subjugation of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? We see then the means of production and of exchange, on whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up, are generated in feudal society. At a certain stage in the development of these means of productions and of exchange, the conditions under which feudal society produced and exchanged, the feudal organizations of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the feudal relations of property became no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces. They became so many fetters. They had to be burst asunder. They were burst asunder. Into their places stepped free competition, accompanied by a social and political constitution adapted to it, and by the economical and political sway of the bourgeoisie class. A similar movement is going on before our eyes. Modern bourgeoisie society, with its relations of production, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of productions and of exchange, is like the sorcerer who is no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld from whom he has called up by his spells. For many a decade past, the history of industry and commerce is but the history of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeoisie and of its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crises that by their periodical return put on its trial, each time more threateningly, the existence of the entire bourgeoisie society. In these crises, a great part of not only the existing products, but also of the previously creative productive forces are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back in the state of monetary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Ew. Words bad. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of the bourgeoisie property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeoisie society. They endanger the existence of bourgeoisie property. The conditions of the bourgeoisie society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, enforced destruction of mass productive forces, on the other, by the conquest of new markets and by the more thorough exploitation of old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. How long is this section? Because I want to start talking about what's going on. Okay, we're almost there. We're almost there, and then I can talk about what I've been reading up until this point. I might do breaks every time we hit like a couple of paragraph breaks, just to kind of give me some time to respond to what I'm reading. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. That's us, y'all. Unless, like, Jeff Bezos is watching. Or anyone that's, like, currently sitting on Congress. Although in this, those people technically aren't the bourgeoisie. They're a tool of the bourgeoisie being used to suppress the proletariat, which I guess does make them a part of the bourgeoisie. It makes them, if you're a tool of the bourgeoisie and you're benefiting, then you're in the bourgeois, and then you're a part of the bourgeoisie. Also, like, I find it really funny that bougie came from bourgeoisie, and every time I say the word, I keep on thinking about bougie. But I mean, this book was written at this point hundreds of years ago, so language changed. Okay, actually, I'm going to stop at this point and go over what I read before, because I'm about halfway through the chapter, and we're about to start talking about the proletariat. So I guess this is the best place to pause and reflect on what we've read. Basically, Marx is saying that during the Industrial Revolution, they were working. They were basically, there was this boom in production. We could make things so much faster, and they were basically making things so fast that they were running out of people to sell them to, and because in capitalism, you want to make make the goods at the cheapest price, which means you also want to pay your workers the least amount, and sell it for the highest price. So you could make hundreds of shirts in a day, but you were unlikely to be able to afford even one shirt at the end of that one day. Um, and eventually, this led to things like unions and stuff like that fighting back and securing workers' rights, which is what Marx is saying when we're kind of in this never-ending and repeating cycle of a rise in power by an upper class, um, and then a cutting down of that power via some sort of revolution when the treatment of the lower class gets to be too much, and they fight back. Um, he compared it to feudalism. He compared it to the American Revolution. He compared it to, like, basically every society has had this happen when the overarching powers become too corrupt and self-interested. Uh, so I think that makes sense. Like, I'm obviously obviously I'm biased, right? Like, I'm I'm a leftist. I'm uh basically a practicing communist. Um I have to do, I have to make a living in the society that I'm in, which means, I have to have a job. Streaming is not my job. Streaming is my hobby. It's what I do on the side. Making YouTube videos is my hobby. I don't get paid to do it. I do it because I feel like it's important to express my beliefs, and it makes me feel really good to produce something. If that's selfish, I don't really care. I don't really think that's a that you know people who make the complaint that oh, you're doing something just to feel better or something like that, then it's like, oh, you don't ever truly do anything out of the goodness of your heart. You do it for, like, the feeling of feeling good or whatever. That's a bullshit argument, because yeah, like, is that a bad thing to do things that make you feel better and help other people? I don't think so. So um it's like I disagree with that particular argument that people make. um and uh and I also don't necessarily think that that I just made a straw man argument, because um people use that people use that argument against Christians, a group that I don't necessarily always get along with. And I think it's bullshit when people use that argument against Christians too. Like this isn't a um a double headed, like, I'm not having a double standard. If people say you only believe in Christ because you're motivated to get into heaven, and so your motivations aren't pure, I'm like, that's bullshit. um if they truly believe that, um and it makes them happy, and it makes them more, it makes them able to get through the day and this existence that we have to do, as long as they're not hurting anyone else, that's totally fine. And I don't care if they are doing it because they think that they will get into heaven in the afterlife. Like, they could be right, they could not be right, but as long as they're happy and they're not hurting anyone else, lay off. Um, and that's my defense of myself against the argument that my argument is a straw man argument. This is going to be a pretty rambly one, guys. Um, so every time that this revolution against the upper class has happened, and then we've had a production, like a shift in production, things have changed, cultures have changed. It seems that these two types of people keep getting even further, like even closer. So we'll take a look at feudalism, right? You had lords, vassals, um, guild masters, journeymen, apprentices, and serfs. Um, so the lords had all the power. They relied on the vassals to basically make sure that their will was enforced. Uh, the vassals worked with the guild masters to kind of like disseminate this law, and also to fill the coffers of the vassals and the lords by making sure that people were taxed appropriately and all that kind of stuff. The journeyman, the apprentice, um, handled like the actual production of goods, and the serfs worked to provide the raw materials. Well, at some point, um, the guild masters and the vassals decided that they didn't need the lord, and they got all of the people below them to cross out the end of the chain. So the middlemen decided that they could be the top guy, and convinced everyone below them that this is what was best for them. And so instead of having feudalism, some of them went to a more representative form of government, and that brought about some changes that were good for them, but definitely benefited the vassals, or I should say, definitely benefited any remaining vassals who were a part of the winning side of the revolution, the remaining guild masters, and like with diminishing returns as you go down the list. Uh, and this keeps happening. Well, why do we need vassals? The vassals are claiming that they're the new lords, even though we appoint them through this. They shouldn't get that. And every time you cut off one of these lines, the people down here are still seeing diminishing returns, but all of these people are getting the biggest return for their during the revolution. Like, they are the ones who are inheriting most of the power, and then some of the power is passed down, and such on and so forth. And this has basically kept happening until we get to the current day, where you have the 1% and the 99%, where like so much wealth is accumulated at the top 1% of the American population, and the rest of the people, the rest of the 99%, basically control about as much wealth as the top 1%. Um, and the people who have the ear of the politicians are the people in those 1%. They have the resources to hold sway, and if you don't see the issues with that, um, Marx is here to kindly tell you that you are not benefiting as much as the bourgeoisie are, um, because we have now taken on the role of every single one of those individuals before. The vassals, the guildsmen, the apprentice, the journeyman, the serfs. We're still doing all of that, and it's the bourgeoisie who are at the top benefiting. I don't think I've misrepresented Marx yet. Feel free to disagree. with me if you watch this on YouTube or talk with me about it in the chat. I am more than open to having discussion about this. This is why I'm doing it on Twitch. I'm not just doing it to record an audiobook. If I was doing it to record an audiobook, I wouldn't be I wouldn't be rambling halfway through every couple of paragraphs. So, basically, in the latter half of this, when he's talking about overproduction and stuff in America in the 90s, people started dumping milk from cows because there were so many farms that were producing milk, and through pasteurization and selective breeding and things, and like all of the uh, advances that were made in livestock and agriculture, they were producing way more milk, and the price of milk was super cheap. But they weren't making any money because they couldn't sell their milk. So instead of like, and because milk is, hard to keep fresh and transport, it's especially back in the 90s, like they can do it now probably with like like with the advances we've made in like refrigeration for long distance travel and things like that. They probably don't have this same set of problems, but they were literally dumping milk. I remember this because my mom was trying to explain it to me, and I was just this like, like 7-year-old kid or something. And I was just kind of like, well, why are they dumping it? That's a waste. And they were like, yeah, but they can't sell it. And if they can't sell it, they can't make money. And if they can't make money, they can't pay their loans on their farms, on their properties, what have you. And then they'll lose everything. And as a kid, I was kind of like that's kind of dumb. I didn't really, you know, a 7-year-old kid isn't going to grasp the fact that isn't going to grasp how capitalism works. And I think my mom did a commendable job, since I even remember like as much about it as I do. But it was just that it was a waste. That is, there was so much milk that could have gone to that could have been given to the community. And then you have to ask the question, why were so many people making milk? Did we need that much milk? Clearly the answer is no, because we wasted milk. Like we wasted so much of it. um like they could have sold it to cheese manufacturers or something, like, and probably all of that stuff was happening and they were still just producing so much. um but yeah, so that was one way to handle the problem, was to destroy your excess. The other way to solve the problem would be to just let some of those farmers um, get bought out by the bank until only the amount of farmers producing milk we needed. Or if you were a farmer, maybe you tried to pivot your you tried to pivot. But I'm not a farmer, so I don't know how difficult that would be. But I imagine that if you're a dairy farmer and uh, you've tied up a lot of investment in your cows and the land for grazing and all of that kind of stuff, just converting it to grow corn or something, like converting it to a different product is going to be hard. And then where are you going to get the money to do that? Probably from a bank, probably from a loan. And you can't do that because you're already in trouble with the bank, because milk prices have gone down so low that you can't pay your mortgage, and they're not going to give you another mortgage so that you can plant seeds that you'll be able to pay them back with a year and a half later, you know? Um, and I mean that's so far that's my take on it. That's kind of like what Marx seems to be saying to me, just based on my life experience. Whew. Wow, we're about a sixth the way through, and I feel like that was a lot of information already. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself. It has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. In proportion to the bourgeoisie, i.e., capital is developed in the same proportion in the proletariat. The modern working class developed a class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity, like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition and all the fluctuations of the market. What I just talked about with the dairy farmers, um, they were selling they were selling they were selling and producing milk. Too many people were selling and producing milk. The market collapsed. They're out of jobs. They have to dump milk just to get by because the cows are going to be producing milk. The cows are always going to be producing milk. That isn't stopping. Um, so your choices are destroy it, or I should say, your choice is to destroy it. That's it. That's all you got. Owing to the extensive use of machinery and to the division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character and consequently all charm for the workman. He has become an appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most monotonous, and most easily acquired knack that is required of him. Hence, the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. But the price of a commodity, and therefore also of labor, is equal to its cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay, more in proportion to the use of machinery and division of labor increases, in the same proportion the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, or by increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by increased speed of the machinery, etc. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of the patriarchal master into the great factory of the industrial capitalist. Masses of laborers crowded into the factory are organized like soldiers. As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under the command of a perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeoisie class and of the bourgeoisie state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, and above all by the individual bourgeoisie manufacturer himself. The more openly this despotism proclaims gains to be its end and aim, the more petty, the more hateful, and more embittering it is. Um, yeah, so imagine, if you will, that you work at a sandwich shop. A sandwich shop uh, with green and yellow colors. This sandwich shop is one of many in the city you live in. And of all of the green and yellow sandwich shops in that city, the person who owns yours owns approximately 75% of the rest of them in town. Your job is to make sandwiches for people when they come in, clean the sandwich shop, uh, unload the materials required to create the sandwiches, and to process payments for the sandwiches. Uh, Also, to ensure that consumers of your green and yellow sandwich shop uh, only take what they are supposed to, and um, should the sandwich shop customers decide to tip you, you must leave that tip in the jar until the end of the month, when the manager of the store, who is related to the owner of the store, comes in and does inventory, calculates exactly how much sandwich materials were used, and deducts from the tip jar any excess um, versus the amount of sandwiches reported. And then, should any be left over, well, in my case, he just fucking kept it. In my case, he just kept the tips. And if you got the if you picked up on the fact that I'm giving you a real life anecdote, you would be correct. This is how it was run. My green and yellow sandwich shop that will not be named, lest I be put, um, you know, put to the irons of libel. Now, I believe that being a factory worker in 1888 is much worse, was much worse than working in a sandwich shop in the late aughts. Much worse. Um, like we said, workers' rights was not a huge thing. Child labor laws were not a huge thing. These were all issues, but the problems that they faced are problems that we are still facing today. The workers are exploited. I gave the owner of my store 30 days notice when I quit. I was going back to school, and I knew that I was not going to be working a job and going back to school. I was going to be moving back in with a relative, and so I didn't need to worry about my rent or my food, and I could still contribute with the excess money that I had saved by working at the green and yellow sandwich shop. At the end of my 30-day notice, the manager of the store still had not found an adequate replacement, and we were down an individual in that store since January of that year, and I quit at the end of May because my lease was up and I was moving back in with my relatives. So the store was just down 2 employees because it was easier to overwork the individuals that were already there than it was to ensure that the store could be fully staffed. The more openly this despotism proclaims gain to be its end and aim, the more petty, the more hateful, and the more embittering it is. It's not a surprise to me that a lot of people are kind of like looking at the events of the last couple decades and becoming more more uh, more radical in both sides, really, in on the left and on the right. It depends on what they view as the problem, you know. Um, and I mean, like it stems from the similar place where people are like, oh yeah, yeah, the government has failed us. The government is the problem, and uh, so for me and for some people who are further on the further on the left, it is okay. Um, we have been progressively moving more and more to like make laws that are conservative and capitalist in nature, that benefits corporations, that benefits the rich and not the you know the underserved and under supported members of society, and that should change. And then people on the right see this as, well, governments are failing, so we should replace it with like with an authority, like with authoritarianism, with someone who's going to be harsh, and then maybe they can control the the corporations and things like that, except that those people will end up being one of the bourgeoisie, you know, Elon Musk's or Jeff Bezos's of the world. That's who would be on top if you follow that ideology. For a time, it looked like Donald Trump would be the figurehead that would be holding that. A man who couldn't give two shits about any other person on the planet. Um, so that's, I mean, like that's something to think about, right? That's important. Back to Marx. The less skill and exertion of strength implied in manual labor, in other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more is the labor of men superseded by that of women. Differences of age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All are instruments of labor, more or less expensive to use according to their age and sex. No sooner is the exploitation of the labor by the manufacturer so far at an end that he receives his wages in cash than he is set upon by other proportions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. The lower strata of the middle class, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, retired tradesmen, generally the handicraftsmen and peasants, all these sink gradually into the proletariat. partly because their diminutive capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern industry is carried on, and is swamped into the competition with the large capitalist, partly because of their specialized skill is rendered worthless by the new methods of production. Thus, the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. The proletariat goes through various stages of development. With its birth begins its struggle with the bourgeoisie. At first, the contest is carried on by the individual laborers, then by the workplace of a factory, then by the operatives of one trade in one locality against the individual bourgeoisie who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeoisie conditions of production, but against the instruments of production themselves. They destroy imported wares that compete with their labor. They smash into pieces machinery. They set factories ablaze. They seek to restore by force the vanished status quo of the workmen of the Middle Ages. At this stage, the laborers still form an incoherent mass scattered across the whole country and broken up by their mutual competition. If anywhere they unite to form more compact bodies, this is not yet the consequence of their own active union, but of the union of the bourgeoisie, which class, in order to attain its own political ends, is compelled to set the whole proletariat in motion, and is moreover, yet for a time, able to do so. At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not fight their enemies, but the enemies of their enemies, the remnants of absolute monarchy, the landowners, the non industrial bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie. Thus, the whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeoisie. Every victory so obtained is a victory for the bourgeoisie. I mentioned him once already, but Mr. Donald Trump, former president, he played on people's fears, people's xenophobia, people's bigotry. Um, he claimed that he would build that wall and that we wouldn't pay for it. He made all sorts of wild claims and pointed us in the direction of the Democrats who were his enemies. He pointed us at Hillary, making claims about emails and all that sort of things. And the battlefield was, was the vote. Um, to use this in a kind of modern context. And then he tried it again for a second term with Biden. And when that didn't work, the January 6th domestic terror attack happened. Um, and uh, and allegations have been levied against him for involvement, but have yet to bear any fruit. And I have to say it that way because I do not want to put myself at risk for libel. So far, things that Marx have been has said back in 1888 are still holding true today. I wanted a light thing to talk about, I guess, which is why I decided to read the fucking Communist Manifesto. Yeah, noted good good piece of literature. I was considering doing a video on Winnie the Pooh going to the public domain, and um and I was going to write my own Winnie the Pooh story and put it online, as its own video. Maybe try and get some friends of mine to do some illustrations for it. That would have been a nice topic. I could be reading Winnie the Pooh right now. Um And this isn't a like I don't want to be reading Mark's statement. This is just a kind of look at, I decided that I wanted to do a low energy kind of chill stream, and I decided to read the Communist Manifesto so that I could get really angry at capitalism again. Something that I already did today for a long time with a buddy that was over. Oh man, this is going to be a mess. Um, Holy shit, it has not felt like an hour. I've been reading the Communist Manifesto for an hour now and talking about random stuff. I mean, I hope that this will be interesting to whoever watches it. It's I should be like clipping shit or something. I mean, I'm definitely going to make some clips and put them up on Twitter. Um, Back to Marx. Just had to take a quick break to look at the Twitter feed. I am really well, I said back to Marx, but I'm about to go off on another tangent. Like I would really like to to do something of value with my time. Do something that I feel is like making a change or making a difference in the world. The jobs that I hold right now, this is probably the most fulfilling one I've had, and it still feels like I'm doing things. I'm doing grunt work for people who think that they're better than me, um, and I don't think that they like overtly think that. Like I don't think like no one's come up to me and just been like, "Hey Joe, I'm better than you. You suck. You didn't even get, you couldn't even hack it. You couldn't even finish college." Um and like no one's been the after school program bully to me. But when you're working with people who all have like doctorates and master's degrees and things like that, and you're like putting pins in a billboard for 3 days in a row because something needs to be moved, and this guy came over and he didn't like the way that looked, so he wants it over there, and you're just like literally doing nothing, just nothing. um and you have to do it because you have to pay your bills. Sucks. It sucks, just flat out. Like, and it's not even that I have an issue with working. It's that I don't see any value in what I'm doing. I'm not fundamentally making the world a better place because I moved a section from the blue board to the yellow board. Um, or that I made these pages a little bit bigger so that the new head of the department will walk by and see them and think that our department is doing things. And it just gets really, I mean, like Mark said, it gets like the more petty it gets, the more the more embittering it is. And my tolerance has gone down over the years. At my first job, I spent nearly 4.5 years there, and it was and was doing things for people who thought that they were better than me and were not shy about voicing it. And then I went to a different place for a year and a half where um I was identified as someone who could join management, but they were taking advantage of my labor and basically had to wait until the very last moment until I started applying for other jobs to actually go ahead and start trying to move me to management roles. And it got to the point with the pandemic and everything, and them not wanting to bring in an appropriate number of workers to handle the quantity, the volume of work we were doing, that I was self harming to get through the day. And so I had made up my mind that I was going to quit. And they made me um, what might be viewed as from people who just look at numbers on the sheet of paper, a very compelling offer to stay and to go ahead and make me into the supervisor manager type position, and I had to turn it down because I view my mental health as more important than my job. Um, I can't keep doing a job if I don't have the mental health to. I'm not going to let a job kill me. That's what I'll say. I'm not going to let a job kill me. And now I'm here. I've been here since November, and already the the these are like some of the nicest people I've ever worked with. It is such a welcome change from what was happening before, but the sheer banality of what I'm doing um, makes it difficult to get any value out of what I'm doing. And unfortunately, I've learned that the the quality of my labor um, has been tied to my mental vision of my own self-worth. And that's why that's why I want to do videos. That's why I want to talk about things on my YouTube channel like Mark's, and read books, and have these types of discussions with people. It's why I'm on Twitter, trying to engage with as many other creators as I can, um, and just people, in the hopes that maybe they will decide to come hang out with me when I'm streaming and reading something. Um, That's why I want to grow my channel into something that, I feel like is doing something. It makes me feel like I'm doing something. It makes me feel like my life is worth a damn. The other day, I told someone on Twitter that um, it's enough to be. It's enough uh, to live your life in a way that makes you happy, despite what society tells you that should look like. And I do that. But I get where they were coming from. They were saying that they were sad that they couldn't bring themselves to talk about political issues as much as they used to because it was doing bad things for their mental health, and they never set out to be an activist. And that's fair. It's not it takes a certain kind of person to do it. I know I'm not one of them. I'm not an activist. I'm not going to be you know batting down the hatches or doing anything. I just want to read some theory, talk about how it makes me feel, and maybe help people understand it, and improve my own understanding of it. I'm very new to this. I don't have a college degree. I was a technical major. Even when I was learning about computers and engineering and things, and I was not doing philosophy courses. I never quite agreed with capitalism, but I also never thought that it was inherently wrong when I was growing up. Granted, I uh, my upbringing was a little strange, and I thought that like capitalism was bad because it wasn't Christianity, and anything that wasn't Christianity was bad. And that's something I was talking about earlier was um, that I'm someone who doesn't even particularly support or believe in Christianity, but I think that the argument against Christians was bullshit. That they're doing it just because they think they'll get to heaven, and that poisons, their intent. Um, but I specify when they're not hurting people, because I was hurt by it. I was hurt quite badly by it, and so that's why I made videos like the um, the first video I put out, the Neftali response video, where he was trying to whip people up into a frenzy about the metaverse and you know the invasion of digital privacy and stuff like that. And while he was talking about important issues, he was spinning it in a way that like was basically fear mongering, and the answer was Jesus. The answer was being a good Christian and reading your books and getting ready for the rapture because the end times are coming, baby. And that's not right. Um, you can't convince people like that in a genuine manner. That's fear mongering. It's playing on people's uh, weaknesses, paranoias, concerns. Instead, you should be looking at the cause of the issue. You should be looking at all of this bullshit with the NFTs, digital ownership. It's all this that it's all this. And if you want to explain it through religion, and you think that it's Jesus, then it's the end times coming true. It's Paul's acid trip for Revelations. Then sure, but um, don't use that to take advantage of people. Uh, I think you're wrong. It's just another tool for people in power to amass a following, point them at an enemy, and have them fight their battle for them. That got a bit more personal than I wanted it to. So, the chain is, you have the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie owns the factory. At the factory, you have middle managers, overlookers, supervisors, whatever you want to call them. After you make your money by working at the factory for low pay and very little gain, you then have to take that home and pay your landlords. You have to pay for your food. You have to pay for furniture, living expenses, all of that kind of stuff. You have to pay for all of that, and it does not leave much room for personal growth or development because the bourgeoisie do not want you to grow or develop. They want you to crank that gear. As long as you can crank that gear and eat enough food to come back tomorrow and crank that gear, then you are doing exactly what you need to be doing. And then we'll give you a day or here to, breed so that one day when you die, your son can come in through those doors and crank that gear. And then the cycle repeats itself until eventually enough people get tired of cranking the gear for no money and no real options for advancement, and they gather up into a group, and maybe the bourgeoisie, they're out of factories, so they can't identify the problem people and bribe them by making them middle managers, or fire them and kick them out, or anything like that. And then they a competitor comes in, someone else who was interested, and says, I'll treat you better, but fuck that guy, right? And then the people get taken advantage of and run that guy out of town, and then work at that guy's gear shop until eventually the same thing happens to him, as any concessions that you win are slowly stripped away from you over time. And that's where unions come in, folks. But with the development of industry, the proletariat now only increase in number. It becomes concentrated in greater masses. Its strength grows, and it feels that strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized in proportion as machinery obliterates all distinction of labor and nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level. The growing competition amongst the bourgeoisie and the resulting commercial crises make the wages of the workers ever more fluctuating. The unceasing improvement of machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihoods more and more precarious. The collision between individual workmen and individual bourgeoisie take more and more of the character of collisions between two classes. Thereupon, the workers begin to form combinations, trades unions, against the bourgeoisie. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provisions beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. That's right, folks. It's union time. Speaking of, this past year in the States, we've had a lot of strikes and not riots. Well, riots too, but the riots were about racial inequality and the fact that the policing institution overly and unnecessarily targets African Americans, and I will not fight on this subject. That is what is happening. I can argue and discuss, like political theory and, economic theory all day. If you think capitalism is better and you prove me, you give me a compelling enough argument, you could change my mind on that. You cannot change my mind on the fact that the institution of policing in general over abuses its power against minorities, because that's a statistical fact. In any case, we've had a lot of union wins. The Kellogg's union strike, the Frito-Lay union strike, the John Deere union strike. Back in 2020, the GM workers strikes. Striking workers have been winning a lot of concessions, and I am here for it. If you can join a union, I highly recommend you do so. If you don't join a union, I highly recommend trying to either get into an industry that has a union available to you, or reading your employee contract to the fucking letter and taking advantage of every resource and arbitration, like our arbitration article that you can, should you find yourself in a situation that is untenable. Also, read your states and local cities labor laws. There are some provisions that can assist you that are only enforceable if you know that they exist, and ignorance of the labor laws in your state only helps the companies take advantage of you. These people that we're working for, that we are selling ourselves to piecemeal, as Marx puts it, they are not your friends. They are not a community. They are not interested in your growth as a human being in any way other than what will make you more valuable to them. Do not proceed as if you and the corporation are on equal footing. You are not. They have more resources, more energy, more time than you will ever have to fight you on anything should adverse events occur. I don't remember what state it in, but recently a number of nurses quit at a hospital to go work to go to work at another hospital where the pay was better and they were going to be getting better benefits. You know, if you're an at-will employee, this is absolutely, you know, a fine thing to do. Now the issue is that the hospital filed an injunction against the hospital that they were going to, stating that they couldn't hire these individuals because it would put the public health care of that area in danger. And the judge supported this. Uh, so now I don't think that this is going to become a standard practice. And if it is, they should totally be collecting unemployment from their previous place of work, as they are unlawfully, you know, barring them from making a living wage with their, you know, at will professions. It's frankly ridiculous that this is even happening. Um, and I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on how that turns out. But that things like this can happen. And that's why the corporations have lawyers, they have specialists or the money to hire specialists to make sure that they will always be getting the better end of the stick. This is happening because I decided that I wanted to do a stream tonight and that I wanted to read Marx. So, thanks, Karl Marx. You're doing it. You're making it. Sorry, you're making it happen. Now and then the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of their battle lies not in the immediate results, but in the ever expanding union of the workers. This union is helped on by the improved means of communication that are created by modern industry, and that place of workers of different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that was needed to centralize the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into one national struggle between classes. But every class struggle is a political struggle, and that union, to attain which the burghers of the Middle Ages, with their miserable highways, required centuries, the modern proletarians, thanks to railways achieve in a few years. And with the advent of the internet, we can achieve instantly. This organization of the proletarians into a class, and consequently into a political party, is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves. But it ever rises up again, stronger, firmer, mightier. It compels legislative recognition of particular interests of the workers by taking advantage of the division of the bourgeoisie itself. Thus, the 10 Hours Bill in England was carried. Although collisions between the classes of old society further in many ways the course of development of the proletariat, the bourgeoisie finds itself involved in a constant battle, at first with the aristocracy. Later on, those with portions of the bourgeoisie itself, whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry, at all times with the bourgeoisie of foreign countries. In these battles, it seems itself compelled to appeal to the proletariat to ask for its help and thus to drag it into the political arena. The bourgeoisie itself therefore supplies the proletariat with its own instruments of political and general education. In other words, it furnishes the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeoisie. Further, as we have already seen, entire sections of the ruling class are, by the advance of industry, precipitated into the proletariat, or at least threatened in their conditions of existence. These also supply the proletariat with fresh elements of enlightenment and progress. So, as the bourgeoisie recruit the proletariat to fight their battles for them, they give them access to better education, and more exposure to how the world works, and maybe gives them a foothold in gaining access to the political systems, and maybe kind of like understanding the inner workings of how the systems work. And then once they have that information, it becomes much harder to root them out. It becomes much harder to get them back under control once the immediate threat has been dealt with. Then they have a new problem. Finally, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour, the process of dissolution going on within the ruling class, in fact within the whole range of society, assumes such a violent, glaring character that a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class. The class holds that the future is in its hands. Just as, therefore, at an earlier period, a section of the nobility went over to the bourgeoisie, so now a portion of the bourgeoisie go over to the proletariat, and in particular, a portion of the bourgeoisie ideologists who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending, theoretically, the historical movement as a whole. So basically, it's saying that some people are going to read the writing on the wall and realize that realize what's coming, and then they will go to I don't want to call it the right side of history, like that implies some kind of inherent morality, but that's kind of like the common statement. That's like kind of how it would be said, where I mean, I think there is a universal good. Like, I think there are some actions you can take that are just good to take. Like, if someone's hungry and you can feed them, and it will, and feeding them will not harm you in any way. It will not disadvantage you in any way. It will only help the individual you are feeding. Then you feed that person. That is a universal good. That sort of thing. But like, if a group has a revolution and they tear down a incredibly corrupt government, and then instill their own version of a corrupt government, that's not good. I wouldn't call that being on the right side of history. I would just call that being on the winning side of history. Of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class. The other classes decay and finally disappear in the face of modern industry. The proletariat is its special and essential product. The lower middle class, the small manufacturer, the shopkeeper, the artisan, the peasant, all of these fighting against the bourgeoisie to save from extinction their existence as fractions of the middle class. They are therefore not revolutionary, but conservative. Nay, more, they are reactionary, for they try to roll back the wheel of history. If by chance they are revolutionary, they are so only in view of their impending transfer into the proletariat. They thus defend not their present, but their future interests. They desert their own standpoint to place themselves at that of the proletariat. The quote-unquote dangerous class, the social scum, that passive rotting mass thrown off by the lowest layers of old society, may here and there be swept into the movement by a proletarian revolution. It is conditions of life, however, prepare it for more of the part for a bribed fool of reactionary intrigue. In the conditions of the proletariat, those of old society at large are already virtually swamped. The proletarian is without property. His relation to his wife and children has no longer anything in common with the bourgeoisie family relations. Modern industrial labor, modern subjection to capital, the same in England as in France, in America as in Germany, has stripped him of every trace of national character. Law, morality, religion are to him as so many bourgeoisie prejudices behind which lurk in ambush just as many bourgeoisie interests. All the preceding classes that got the upper hand sought to fortify their already acquired status by subjecting society at large to their conditions of appropriation. The proletarians cannot become masters of the productive forces of society except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation, and thereby also every other previous mode of appropriation. They have nothing of their own to secure and to fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property. All previous historical movements were movements of minorities or in the interests of minorities. The proletarian movement is the self conscious, independent movement of the immense majority, in the interests of the immense majority. The proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot stir, cannot raise itself up, without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being sprung into the air. Though not in substance, yet in form, the struggle of the proletariat with the bourgeoisie is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all settle matters with its own bourgeoisie. How am I going to wind down for talking with 3 hours of my friends? I'm going to talk for 2 hours about the bourgeoisie by reading Marx. I'm probably only going to do the first chapter tonight because it's already been an hour and 30 minutes, about an hour and 40 minutes, and I've got friends coming over tomorrow as well. So, I'm going to have to cut out eventually. We're almost there. In depicting the most general phases of development of the proletariat, we traced the more or less veiled civil war raging within existing society up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution, and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we have already seen, on the antagonism of oppressing and oppressed classes. But in order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it under which it can, at least, continue its slavish existence. The serf in the period of serfdom raised himself to membership in the commune, just as the petty bourgeoisie under the yoke of feudal absolutism managed to develop into a bourgeoisie. The modern laborer, on the contrary, instead of rising with the progress of industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence of his own class. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. And here it becomes evident that the bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class in society, and to impose its conditions of evidence upon society as an overriding law. It is unfit to rule because it is incompetent to assure an existence to its slave within his slavery, because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state, that it has to feed him instead of being fed by him. Society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society. The essential condition for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeoisie class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on competition between the laborers. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of laborers due to competition by their revolutionary combination due to association. The development of modern industry, therefore, cuts from under its very feet the foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeoisie, therefore, produces above all is its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. So, as far as I know, there has not yet been a mass communist movement I don't think that the Communist Party of Russia counts, or the Socialist Party, because they weren't actually socialist. They were using that as a name. kind of like the Nazis used the National Socialist Party as its kind of like springing off point when they were very clearly fascist dictatorship, which is not socialism at all. Um, and that's a very important distinction, because when people throw around terms like socialist, that's kind of like what they're referring to, when that's a inappropriate association. Basically, capitalism is at some point going to burn itself out. We've been having unions form and winning things. The pandemic has really shown me and probably more Americans that the government is more interested in you as a producer of economic value than you as an individual human with unalienable rights. They want you to get back to work. They don't care if there's a 1% chance that you will die. Like with the whole like, oh, what's the fatality rate of COVID? The fatality rate of COVID is like between 1 and 2%. And that's a really high chance when you consider things like the common cold really only have a chance of killing like immunocompromised individuals and stuff like that. Like most diseases that we have um, treatments for are don't won't kill you unless there are other underlying issues, and we need to protect the people who have those underlying issues by not forcing people who they live with and who support them to go back to work because the government wants us to continue making our you know global political wealth ratio go up. That's that isn't okay to me, and it shouldn't be okay to you. And if it is okay to you, um, I'd consider examining that thought and seeing, you know, why you believe that creating value for America is more important than your life. And if you haven't considered it in the terms of your life, why not? Because you could die of COVID. Even if you're vaccinated, there's still a chance that you could come down, or it could disable you permanently, and then you can't work, and then you'll have a hell of a time navigating the the health and wellness system, like the healthcare system of America, especially for disabled individuals. um is it really worth going back to work for a country that gave you just the bare minimum to survive a month, and then again half as much, and then the other half once the other guy took the seat? I'll say it right now, very clearly, I was not a supporter of Donald Trump, and I think he did a terrible job in the role of president and in the role of combating the pandemic. Um, I do not like Joe Biden, and I think that he has done a terrible job in the face of the pandemic and looking after the health, safety, and well being of the American people. So if you think this has to do with parties, political parties, you can kiss that thought goodbye. That's not what it's about. Every time a union succeeds, a union is formed and then broken. but then comes back. We are building momentum. We are building this party that Marx supposes will come together and exist. And due to extreme measures taken by the incumbent governments, um, they have managed to suppress any mass unionization of the working class. Um, and I don't know if I'll be alive to see it. Uh, but for me, um, right now at least, based on the world I'm living in and what I'm seeing, I'm beginning to believe that that'll happen. I don't know when. I don't even know if it'll happen in my lifetime. But if enough people realize what's going on, and especially through the lens of this pandemic, I think it will be an eye opening experience. Um, they will see that our government does not have our best interests at heart. Our government is looking after itself, and it was supposed to be, a government for the people by the people, but it's not, and it hasn't been for a long time. It is a government by the people for the corporate elite who lobby for tax breaks, concessions, more, more lenient regulations or deregulation in general, for bailouts when they make bad bets on the market and end up crashing like the housing market and causing one of the greatest recessions ever, uh, and then do it again 10 years later, and then get hit with a global pandemic. And Jeff Bezos comes out and Elon Musk come out making more money than they ever had before because they were capitalizing on the fact that we couldn't leave our homes and we were being forced to use Amazon delivery services and things like that to get the goods and services that we needed delivered because the government couldn't do it, even though places like Vietnam could. Now, you don't have to listen to me, and you probably won't. But just give that a thought, okay? I don't even know if communism is necessarily the answer to our problems. I don't know if communism will ever come about. I I I don't like money or the concept of it or the fact that I have to sell myself to get the basic, to secure the basic needs of survival to exist so that I can keep on working. Um, but do I think that at this point, do I think money's going to go away? Probably not. Probably not. Um, what's more likely to happen is is if things end up more socialist in nature, we might institute a universal basic income so that the and a rent lock to kind of like ensure that the cost of living um, takes no more than a certain percentage of your universal basic income, so that you can use the rest to pay your bills, get your food, and support yourself. And then you can go forth and improve upon yourself as a person and produce things that you want to, and chase after the pursuit of happiness, which is part of that their constitution. The the fact of the matter is, our options have been limited. We don't have the same choices that people had available to them um, in the like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And uh, and people are trying to undo the rights that minorities were secured to them, even if they can't take them away in the same way. They'll over prosecute and over punish African Americans through the legal systems. They will shoot, intimidate, um, frame, and corrupt uh, young black people, trans people, LGBT people. Anyone who they are not, who aren't viewed as acceptable, will get shat on by the system. And this serves the this serves the bourgeoisie just great. And the there's a subsection. There are issues that are keeping the proletariat kind of like divided. Race is definitely one of them. Religion is one of them. It's kind of like, hey, let's blame the problem on immigrants, and that way the immigrants won't look like the citizens won't look at us as the enemy. They'll look at the immigrants, which will lead to racism and xenophobia, which will lead people who disagree with the racists and the xenophobes to not want to associate or organize with them, and also will continue using immigrant labor because immigrant labor is actually beneficial to the corporations. And also it basically continues to feed the hate machine that we need to keep the working class, the proletariat, separated. Um, and so it's kind of like it's a double edged sword. They get their cheap labor. Then they can outsource, and then they can blame the fact that the labor was cheaper elsewhere, and that's why we sent it overseas. If you make the labor cheaper here, we'll bring it back. And then the racists will do what the racists do and be just genuinely unpleasant and disgusting, um, treating humans like they are animals, less than their, lesser than, and I can't abide by that, so I can't associate with them. Um, and and they won't associate with me either, because to them I'm part of the problem. I'm not part of the solution. So you have a proletariat that's currently just warring with itself over these issues, while we're going to the government, who are just corporate shills doing whatever corporations say, and corporations um, don't want to end this cycle, because once we get racial equality, once we get LGBT equality, once we get all of those things, and it becomes normalized, what do we look at next? What we look at next is how we've been treated as a collective, all of us, the 99%, whatever you want to call it. How have we been treated by the corporations and the government? And then we say, no, we got our rights. We're all human beings. We deserve to be treated better. And then we make them do it. And if they don't want to do it, there are still ways to force them. So that was my reading of section 1 of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, with a couple of rants kind of peppered in there. I'm definitely going to do this again. I probably am going to do something a little bit lighter on Sunday. I might play some more mid boss or something like that. But yeah, so thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it if you came and watched this. And I'm probably going to post parts of this on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it. By the way, this is what I look like. I guess if you watch the stream clips about marsh plants, you've already seen me. And also, it's my icon, so yes, I'm a kind of schlubby looking white dude. I'm sorry. um, I'd like to thank uh, my buddy over at Escape Sound, who provided me with the equipment that I use to stream. You might notice that I sound way better and have started sounding way better ever since about a month ago, and that's because I have been provided with an XLR setup, and have been working on using that. In fact, it's right here. It's right out of frame, and I'm very happy that I managed to get it out of frame. And I'm gonna check and see if it's actually in frame. If you can see it, it's right here. I'm actually touching it, so it's that close, and it's picking me up pretty well. And also, I adjusted the gain, so I noticed that I was pretty quiet on most of my recordings, because I record my settings through OBS, because I've got plugins that make me sound good on OBS that don't work in Audacity. So I record it, and then I throw it into Audacity, and then I use Audacity to fuck with it. Anyways, that's my process. Yeah, so shout out to Oniboy9, most recent follower. Thank you. You should check out Facebook, not Facebook, YouTube, if you want to watch more leftist content. And book club I will probably be posting this. I'll probably be posting this. I mean, I talk about some heavy stuff about myself. But at this point, it's going to be a 2-hour fucking video. That's going to take forever to render. And I don't particularly care. I might just do some highlights, cut out some of the rants, cut out some of the dead air, because there were a couple of times when I was checking Twitter, and also kind of taking a moment to decompress. Also, we just hit 2 hours. But yeah, thanks, Onyboy9. I appreciate you. As always, thanks, Mayhem's Mistress. Mayhem's Mistress is a really cool, really chill, non-binary, polyamorous streamer who is really entertaining, really high energy, sick as fuck, and puts themselves through some of subjects themselves to horror games on Fridays on occasion, and is just generally a really chill individual and streamer, despite being so high energy. They're wholesome as fuck. So go check them out. Um, as always, please stay safe out there. Get vaccinated if you can. And remember, I loves you. Have a good night.